me turn down the volume on my phone and my computer. All right, thank you. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the June 19th, 2023 special session for the Auburn City Council meeting. A good evening, Councilman Berlant, just in time. We just convened. I'd like to call this meeting to order, and Mr. Holmes, will you please lead us in the pledge?
Yes. I
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much. Madam Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Councilmember Amara.
Present.
Berlant. Holmes.
Here.
Riddell Harris. Here. Mayor Don Calvillo.
Present. Let the record show we do have a quorum for the purposes of tonight's meeting. And next item on the agenda is public comment. This is an opportunity for any member of the public to address the commission or the council on an item not on our agenda tonight. We cannot take action on said items, but we can refer them to staff for subsequent discussion, possibly at a noticed meeting. All right, with that said, I'd like to open public comment. Madam Clerk, I understand we have public comment online.
We do. And if it wasn't for terrible timing, I don't know if
Oh,
the internet went out
went out.
briefly. So
Okay.
my,
well, while we're trying to establish that
Yeah.
under public comment, because we don't have, this is a special session and we don't have mayor's accommodations, proclamations and so forth. I just want to take this opportunity to congratulate the Auburn Recreation District on a well-done party Saturday to mark their 75th birthday or anniversary, if you will. It was great, an all-day party. They had a synchronized swimming show. They had a bike parade. They had jump houses. They had music. It was just a phenomenal day, all day long, party in the park, and just very, pleased with their get together. I know that Councilman Berlant was there with his family, and so congratulations and kudos to them. And also, I would be remiss if I did not point out that we have Western States Endurance Run. We have runners that are coming into town now. That's happening this weekend. They're going to have phenomenal weather, except that they'll be running the first 30 or so miles in snow. So it's going to be really interesting to see the timing of the winners when they come in. And of course, we have our event in the Park Preserve for that tomorrow at 5 o'clock. The private Wednesday. Yeah, I'm sorry, Wednesday. But this marks the 50th anniversary of Western States Endurance Run as well. So happy to commemorate that important date as well. Looking forward to meeting some runners on Wednesday and welcoming them to the Endurance Cup of the World finish line. All right, is the internet back up? So we don't have the internet. So what I'd like to do, Council, I'll ask, is there any additional public comment? Hearing none, what I'd like to do is just to continue public comment until which time the internet is back up so that our individual that's online has the opportunity to speak to us. With that said, we're going to roll into the budget workshop, and I'll go ahead and defer to our city manager, or actually, and to both of you.
Mayor, members of the council, on the record, Nathan Bagwell, serve as your Director of Administrative Services, and I have the privilege this evening of presenting to you a budget workshop.
So your mic is not very loud. I don't know if you need to speak into it a little bit or
Is that better? It might not be.
no. So, yeah. Not that we have, but I need to be able to hear you.
He was good online.
Oh, he's good online. Okay.
Speak again.
Is that? are you
That's
able to-
better.
He's here.
Okay, good. All right.
Okay,
As long as we can.
I
hear
would
him.
appreciate if you speak up just a little bit.
You
Yeah,
got
'cause
it.
we're over
Maybe
here.
My altitude or something.
Well,
I think
understand.
it's the
I do.
fan, because it's, oh, there we go, now,
That is-
okay. Please proceed, wait, are we online yet for public, okay. All right,
We're online and streaming online, and we can't access the two people in our.
okay, it's just because I hate to get rolling in this for a long, lengthy period of time, and then, make them wait for an hour or something, but we'll do the
Correct.
best that we can, so. Continue, please, sorry about that.
No problem at all. So again, for the record, Nathan Bagwell, I serve as your Director of Administrative Services, and tonight I have the pleasure of presenting you with a budget workshop. which we will be discussing. Let's see, I think I have this turned on. We're going to do an overview of the budget development process to date. We'll take a quick look at the general fund forecast. We will also be considering a proposed financial management policy, as well as American Recovery Plan Act spending. So just at a high level, and you've seen this before, what we've done so far in the budget process is we reviewed the previous year's financial activity. We brought forward a mid-year report in March. Then we go forward and prepare a baseline budget for the coming fiscal year 23-24. We had our first budget workshop on April 24th. We brought forward general fund updates, fund reserves, and had another, apologies, so May 8th, we did not have the FMP that got moved to tonight, but we had another workshop on May 8th. And then we are coming back this evening to discuss financial management policies and ARPA funding. So just to give you a real high level review of the general fund, at our last public discussion regarding this, I think you might have seen this at the last meeting, but we were projecting a deficit in the upcoming fiscal year. So we have since balanced the budget. The city is currently in negotiations with the city's 5 labor groups, so as not to get ahead of any potential agreements with labor and subsequent decisions made by this council. This forecast does not contemplate salary growth. However, staff has developed opportunities. There are some placeholders in the current and next fiscal year, but I do want to stress that upon agreement by this council and authorization going forward on MOUs, that will significantly change the forecast on the out years, as we will then be implementing the agreements as they come forward for your consideration. So that brings us then to the matter of the financial management policy. And this is a summary of what is in the staff report. What it does is what it's proposed to do is update the fund balance policy from 8 years ago. And it's really intended to reflect current practices and bring forward some proposed new best practices. This provides definition and specificity to proposing to increase economic contingency reserve with an annual goal of 40% of annual sales tax. It brings forward an employee unfunded liability reserve, a litigation reserve, and then we do want to note on the capital reserve for one-time projects and the major equipment for vehicle replacement. There is one modification that we're proposing between now and adoption for your consideration, is that in looking these over, they do seem to kind of say the same thing. And so we would be looking to basically combine those two, but for the purposes of this discussion and what was in the staff report, we're going to leave them separate. But just want you to know that that is a track that we're on, as we want to kind of consolidate and make this more clear throughout the body of the policy.
You're looking to merge capital reserve and major equipment and vehicle replacement reserve?
Yes, yeah. And we also had an opportunity to meet with the city treasurer and go over some comments and recommendations that she had with regards to this policy. And so we will be working to implement some of that language. If we are unable to get it in before adoption, we'll bring this back at a later time. But that was also one of the things that we discussed as far as those being very similar types of activities and how we could really kind of consolidate and make it more clear and just put them into one.
You mean other funds here of merging additional funds, reserve funds?
No,
Or just
no,
language?
she just had a couple of just sort of like clarifications that she thought would make the policies a little bit more streamlined.
Okay, policy language itself.
Right, yeah,
Thank you.
yeah.
Thank you, Sean.
We're gonna wait. I just wanted to be clear as he's not, when he talked about those two. Yes, well, I'll hold my questions too. Thank you.
So here's a look at the projected reserves fiscal year 23-24. So what this visual represents is how the reserves are currently tracked. The total anticipated reserves of 48% represent a robust fund balance reserve. GFOA recommendation is no less than 2 months of expenditures, and this is almost 6. So what this should look pretty familiar to you, this layout. Essentially, this is what we've been tracking for the last, I'd say, several years. Economic contingency reserve, unfunded liability. We have our prepaid insurance. Total anticipated reserves of 48%. Oh, no problem. Represent a robust fund balance reserve. GFOA recommendation is no less than 2 months of expenditures. And
Groundhog Day.
Why don't you hear that part?
Sorry, I'm trying to get it through the screen share on Zoom. So it's-
represent a robust fund balance reserve. GFOA recommendation is no less than 2 months of expenditures.
Groundhog Day.
Make sure. Here you go.
All right, thank you very much, Ms. Clerk.
Sorry about that.
So just to circle back, this is in line with what you're used to seeing. We have our economic contingency reserve and the amounts are what you're used to seeing. The 2.7 million has been like that for a while. The pension unfunded liability used to be 2 million. We've reduced it to 1 in the last couple of years, but that's not a change from last year. Prepaid insurance cost is an ongoing. Police donation reserve, fund balance reserve for future projects. Those are the one-time fund balance projects that we set aside in the capital from the general fund. And then we get down to unobligated fund balance. So with this consistent with the staff report in your package for this item, here's a look at the projected reserves at fiscal year end for 23-24. So as a summary, this is an increase proposed economic contingency from 2.7 to 3.447 million. Pension is staying the same, as is insurance costs. Employee unfunded liability, litigation, and equipment replacement reserve, which, as we mentioned previously, we're intending to merge with fund balance reserve for future projects. The major equipment vehicle replacement $1 million is new here. And as you see as proposed, staff proposes this policy to go into effect with the adoption of the budget. And we'll be happy to answer any questions you might have about any particular facets of these particular proposed reserves, just kind of at a high level, what we're looking at here as far as contingency reserve, why some of these amounts. The 3.47 million really is set aside. It's proposed to be at 40% of the annual sales tax revenue. Does not have to be that high, but that's what we picked as a number, basically to kind of build us that opportunity in case something were to change dramatically in our tax base. It would give us some time to react. And we would then look to council for direction as to where you want to set that limit. The unfunded liability reserve, you've seen that before. Essentially what that is for is, as you're aware, we issued a pension obligation bond. And at the time, at this moment, we are right now what you would call super funded. We're at close to or above 100%, all 6 of our tiers. It's slightly higher than 100% in some of our tiers. So we're in really good shape from a pension standpoint. What that money is set aside to do is to, if there comes a new bill for unfunded accrued liability. And as you know, as you're aware, PERS is always 2 years behind with their actuarials. So we expect in the next couple of months, we're going to get an update as to how the market's been doing as far as like pension funds and whatnot. That could change for next year, but we'd be looking at getting a bill for UAL. They could change their discount rate. So essentially what they could do is change our normal cost. They could change our discount rate went through the normal cost, and they could also increase the unfunded accrued liability amount. So there's this big amortization schedule that goes into this amount that you're billed. We have pre-funded our UAL, but it could change. And that's what that $1 million is intended to do, so that we would not have an impact in a given fiscal year if that were to change. Prepaid insurance costs is truly something that it's really like an accounting book entry. It's with our risk pool. That's not really cash that we have to set aside. That's cash that's on hand with our insurance. Employee unfunded liability reserve. This is set aside basically as for what employees leave balances if they were to cash out. And this would then give us an opportunity if there were some large cash outs, some large retirements within the year, that could come out of this fund without having a major impact on the budget. The litigation reserve, this one is set aside specifically for things that the risk pool would not cover already. And things that fall under that, and Gary could probably do a better job with the legalese, but essentially if the city were issued some kind of injunction to stop doing something or a writ of mandate to start doing something, any activity associated with that wouldn't necessarily be covered by our risk pool insurance. So what this is to do is basically it's a set aside to say, okay, if something were to occur, there's this money set aside that's going to basically insulate the annual budget from, basically being hit by something we couldn't have foreseen. And as we mentioned previously, the fund balance and major equipment are looking to be combined. The fund balance reserve for future projects, that 999 number, that is a specific number. What that is proposed is basically comprises of is there's a large amount of equipment capital for the fire department. And the fire truck lease is in that number, and that fire truck lease goes out another 7 years. So it's 79,000 annually, but we still have the whole set aside for the entire amount. So about half of that $1 million is that fire truck lease. And then that brings us down basically to the delta, the difference, and we would then have about $850,000 unobligated fund balance. So that was a lot. And Sean, did you want to weigh in on some of that?
I was just gonna add, I think it'd be a good idea to pause here, talk about the financial management policy, get a decision on that, and then go into the ARPA funding to keep it a little bit more
Yeah,
kind of corralled, easier to understand. I just wanted to add a couple things too. So these different levels of and different buckets that we have that we're proposing here are pretty typical for other cities. Loomis had something pretty similar. Colma had the same. So the two other cities I've been in, both of those had similar buckets. The dollar amounts are obviously different. They're based on where you're at. So, but the buckets themselves are basically pretty similar to what I've seen in other cities. The major equipment and vehicle replacement reserve, when we were talking to Dawn about that, she was talking about the CIP reserve that we have, capital improvement projects. These are all capital projects. If we buy a fire truck, that's a capital purchase. There's not really a need to have a separate fund for that. Those should roll into the CIP fund reserve and put it all into one spot. Still track it a little bit separately, but have it be part of that one specific fund.
What would the fund be called?
It's just part of the capital improvement plan fund reserve that we roll through. The other thing I'll note is in Loomis, previous city, we didn't have an unobligated fund balance. Every year at the end of the budget, when everything was trued up, we got through the audit, all that, whatever was left rolled into a separate fund that we had for this transportation fund reserve. So specifically set aside for roads, we never carried a balance on the unobligated fund reserve. That's the way that city did it. I know that this city does it differently, but typically you don't want to carry a big unobligated fund balance because, you know, you want to make sure that that's being put in, you're getting interest, all that stuff. So for what it's worth.
Any questions about the financial management policy or?
Council, any questions on the financial policy? Councilman Holmes, do you have a question? Okay. Councilwoman Amara? Yes.
Excuse me. So on the economic contingency reserve, you indicated 40%. Is that what jurisdictions are doing, or how did we come up with that number?
So I wasn't here during that conversation, but it's a typical amount. Previous cities have been 100%. Loomis is 100%. Colma was like 150%. It just depends on how much you want to sock away for, you know, an unanticipated economic problem. So
Okay,
it just depends on what you
100% of their reserve, of their sales tax?
Mhm. Yeah.
Okay. And the then we talked to the litigation reserve. That's new, isn't it? We've never had that, have we?
That's a new one.
Okay, and so you indicated that it's for when we're not insured. Is 150,000 could go pretty fast? Is that enough, or is it too much? And I obviously you must think it's just right, but can you just tell me a little bit? Do other jurisdictions have that amount as well?
It depends on the jurisdiction and to what their strategy may be. In our particular jurisdiction, just to kind of, be fully, kind of shed light on it. I basically took a number that's half of what we spend on our attorney fees in a given year, assuming that we likely would not have litigation in excess of that in a given year that we didn't already have some budget for to begin with.
Okay.
That's where that number came from. It is necessarily tied to a historical trend because, litigation, right? It's going to be some kind of unique, unforeseen thing. So that's where that number came from. We wanted to not pick something so high that it didn't make sense. And we wanted to have something in there that if we did have some kind of large litigation, that it wasn't going to have an immediate and catastrophic impact on our annual budget.
So that brings me to then what we pay our attorney. It fluctuates from year to year quite a bit, I would imagine.
It can. Yeah.
Okay. So I guess my question would be then, how much did we budget for our attorney this year then? Was it 300 then?
Yes, I think it's real close to that.
And that was based on last year's expense?
Well, actually, so yes and no. So it has been trending up. We have a modifier built into that on an annual basis. We typically confer with Gary's office before we plug that number in. But we also try to take them in a vacuum as well. Like we had a couple years in a row where we had some particularly high litigation. We don't necessarily want to assume that because we don't really want to tie up budget without there being a real nexus to it. So we looked at a trend line, we talked to Gary about it, and essentially what we did was we went baseline on that number and assumed that we're not going to continue to have the level of litigation that we have seen the last couple of years. We don't
And-
expect it.
Just as a reminder to the council, of course, we did agree to a rate increase for
Yeah.
Gary this
I know,
fiscal year.
yeah.
So there would
A
be-
rate increase, but also we restructured his
Yeah, the term.
billing
Mhm.
terms.
Mhm.
So retainer, yeah,
Yeah.
he's not on retainer.
Mhm.
So maybe, anyway. Then I guess the question is, what if we go over what we budgeted? Would that come out of this fund?
So if we were to go over, you mean as far as what's in the general fund for, say, like Catalano, like Mr. Bell's office?
Yes.
It depends on the incident.
Then what?
It depends on the incident itself. In some cases, we may have some insurance coverage. In other cases, we may not. So if we do have insurance coverage, no, we wouldn't
Right.
use this. But if Gary's line item goes up and over budget, it depends on why.
Okay.
That makes sense. I mean, it would, without getting
So,
into,
but since it's part of our reserves, we could touch it, right? If we wanted to.
Yeah.
We could,
we could.
I mean, we don't have to wait for it to be, well, anyway, okay, yeah, I hear what you're saying. Thank you. And, oh, and then my understanding then is that the equipment and the fund balance reserve for future projects will be consolidated to one line item.
Right.
Okay. And how is that different from the unobligated fund balance?
So there's specific programming associated with an intent behind the fund balance reserve for future projects. So half of that money is already considered programmed unless council decides to change direction on these projects. However, we have $1 million of fund balance from the general fund that we've already said, hey, this is what we're going to do with that money. The other $1 million is truly what we'd consider a step in the right direction in terms of us getting out in front of vehicle and equipment replacement, as opposed to maybe being a little more reactive as we may have been in the past. We are aware that we have some needs from an apparatus standpoint that we're trying to essentially get on a schedule now of getting in front of these things instead of coming back and saying, hey, we're way past the useful life, et cetera. And this is something that we're trying to move in the right direction. And part of that moving in the right direction, and I don't want to speak and and volunteer my coworkers for too much, but we are looking to develop a more robust schedule of vehicle and equipment replacement that would then tie directly to this so that we can get out in front of, hey, we know this is coming. We have these funds here. We can program it for that and off we go.
So the fund balance reserve for future projects and major equipment will be called what?
Well, go ahead, John.
I think it all runs into the CIP,
CIP?
Yeah.
Okay.
capital improvement plan.
Yeah. And that's different than the unobligated fund balance.
Totally. Yeah. The CIP, capital improvement plan is usually a 10-year plan looking at capital improvements, right? So building stuff,
Okay.
buying new vehicles, the unobligated fund balance is just what's left over
Right.
after all of the.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. That's all the questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilwoman Riddell Harris.
Thank you. Thank you for this presentation. I just had two quick questions. We had talked about not having saved any money for doing general plan and other types of planning. Is that in one of these, or where's that savings account going to be located? Is it something like this?
So we are going to talk about the general fund in the ARPA discussion.
Yeah.
But as far as on the go forward, up above and beyond what's in the ARPA discussion, no, we do not have that contemplated currently.
Okay, because we've talked about having a plan for doing some kind of policy around general, so we don't end up with the issue of we have $3 million to pay for and no way of paying for it. So we could start at least I know that we're going to probably just be paying for it for the next couple of years, but if we can start figuring out what that fund and that policy looks like, that would be great. And then what are the guidelines around what's considered major equipment? I'm just trying to, I know that we've got in addition to vehicles and things, I know we have a lot of old HVAC equipment and other types of things. Are those included in there? Are we, or do we have like other ways of making sure that we're maintaining our facilities effectively, not just vehicles? I know it's all part of the CIP, but I'm just trying to figure out what goes in CIP versus what goes in this account.
And that's a fair question. And I think what we probably also need to do is develop a policy of what we consider major equipment.
Yeah.
I don't think we necessarily have one right now.
Yeah, what goes in this
Yeah.
bucket versus what is just becomes part of the CIP? It's not super clear.
Yeah, I think that needs some further definition.
Great, thank you.
Sure.
Thank you. Councilman Berlant?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I have a couple of questions on the policy, specifically the appropriations portion, which is number 7, page 15 in the staff report. I just was really trying to wrap my mind after reading it multiple times, wrap my mind around who has authority to spend. And what I take away is very clearly that in these reserves that are up here, that like bullet number 1 says that's an appropriation requiring city council action. But what I started to get really confused on is the 3rd bullet under appropriations requiring city manager action that says appropriation of budgeted assigned revenue. And I understand what each of those words mean, and assigned is a definition in the policy, but unbudgeted and then with the word assigned revenues, I wasn't quite clear what that meant. And I just want to make sure that that myself and my colleagues and our city manager fully understand what it is that he has authority over and that we do not.
Okay, thank you for the question. And that is something that could use some more fleshing out, as I understand it. Something to that effect. Let's call it a particular type of revenue that comes in one particular type of way. Let's use, I'm not going to pick on anybody, I'll just use it as an example, like property seizure.
A what?
A property asset seizure.
Okay.
Something comes in and it's a significantly higher amount than maybe we budgeted in a given year. Essentially what I understand this to mean, and Sean, you can, if that's not the track you're on, we get an additional amount of revenue and it's only that kind of revenue. It's basically restricted. It can only be used through that, it comes in that way, right? That's okay. If we get extra, that it's okay for Sean or the city manager to say, this is this kind of money, it's this color of money, it could be used for these things. That's fine. Another example might be a particular type of revenue that is very specific to one type of business. It can only be used for those things. It
Or
comes in.
enterprise fund, like the sewer, if there's money, a certain monies that come into
Yeah.
the sewer enterprise fund.
Yeah.
That can only be used for those purposes, then that would
Right.
be, that would qualify for an unbudgeted assigned revenue if we got additional revenue there, or the airport, or any of the enterprise stuff, right? Okay.
But I guess then my comment to that would be, that seems like it is skirting the budget process. If we get more in revenue, that's great. But that almost seems like that is a council, a policy discussion of how to use it. I think if it was clearer, and I didn't really hear it completely, and I realized it was an analogy. If it was clearly being used for the purpose that it was brought in for, not just the fund it was going to. So it came in from via sewer, so it was going to be spent on sewer. But that's different than it being spent on sewer on projects that are approved by the council and through the public budget process. And so I don't know if, at least for me, I'm not, and I'm, I want to empower you to, be able to make decisions. And it'd be one thing if this was emergency related or not specific, but this could be $5 million, right? There's nothing that gives some parameters. And based on how much comes in, it just seems to me that there would want to be some council discussion. And so I don't know what the answer tonight might be, but I guess I'm just not completely comfortable with that verbiage. But I would ask that at least maybe we relook at that policy before we approve it next week.
Okay.
To see, is there language that empowers city staff to make decisions that are necessary based on these specific needs, but are we still bringing back to the policymaking group those type of items?
Yeah, I think that the idea of this is like restricted revenue, right? Gas tax money can only be spent on gas tax related stuff. I think maybe changing the word assigned to being restricted revenue, right? If we got a windfall amount of $5 million because we got a new business in town that brought in $5 million of unrestricted revenue, that obviously would be coming back to council to figure out what to do with. Gas tax money can only be spent on gas tax stuff. Sewer can only be spent on sewer stuff. If it's general fund revenue that's different than assigned revenue in my mind.
So now I'm going to do the inverse of this whole conversation. It seems to me that maybe we would want to give appropriation authority to the city manager for emergency situations. Specifically, we talked about the litigation as an example. Obviously, the council is going to authorize those funds. But the way I read it, it would need to come back through the budgeting process for us to approve the allocation or that appropriation out of that reserve. Same could be said for the whatever the capital improvement fund will get a new name. If there was a giant issue with a sinkhole and it was an emergency and we had to access those funds, I would assume there's communication, but we probably don't have the time to come back here. And so I don't know if, and I don't know if my colleagues agree, but I would think that emergency situations like that, accessing some of these specific reserves, we would want to grant some level of authority with some communication.
Yeah,
That's
and it depends on the nature of the emergency, right? If it's a sinkhole, we can get, contractors out there, whatever, to mobilize to prevent further damage, but council would actually have to declare an emergency for us to
Yes.
be able to skirt the public act, the public contracting rules. If it's a fire that's sweeping into town, knock on wood, that's a different thing. We might have to do certain stuff and I'll just do what we have to do to make sure that we're protecting the city. But we would still probably have to come back sooner or later and declare an emergency.
Yes.
It depends on the nature of what it is. And I haven't gone through the municipal code yet. And I don't know, that should be outlined in there. If it's not, then we need to do that. I'm assuming that it is.
It
that there's
is
some
for the
sort of
emergency
process.
declaration. There's a process,
Yeah.
24-hour notice or 2-hour notice and all
Yeah,
that.
yeah. So it really depends on the nature of an emergency. If it's, like a catastrophic fire sweeping through here, then I probably won't come to you to ask if we can have additional resources put onto that fire. And I'll come back and ask for forgiveness instead. So,
I appreciate that. And I appreciate the honesty and the directness. We're just updating the policy. And
Sure.
so if there's ways to empower language so that you don't have to skirt around and ask for forgiveness, this may be the opportunity, but that at least answers my questions on the appropriation. One thing that confused me just a bit, and only because I don't think I fully processed it as quickly enough. You talked about the lease for the fire truck. What was that dollar amount?
So over the next 7.5 years, it's about $79,000 a year. So the totality of it's about 592.
Got it. Okay.
So that's what's in that. That's in that 999, 560 number. But we're considering that
1,000 a year plus.
programmed.
Not this year's, but the other 6 years.
So
'Cause I would assume this year's
Yeah.
money that needs to be pulled out is an expenditure in
Right.
the fire department budget.
yeah. So we record that as revenue within this year. And then what we essentially do is we say, we acknowledge the rest of that payment over the next 6.5 years beyond this coming fiscal year. And that's where we get those two numbers combined to be 592.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I think that answers my questions on the policy itself. Thank you. Thank you, Madam.
Madam, I have that. Whenever you're done, I have that question too.
Oh, okay. So thank you very much for the presentation. I appreciate it very much. I think that certainly budgeting reserves is prudent and responsible of us. And I appreciate the numbers that you have here, the policy itself. I didn't have any specific questions with regards to the policy, but I just did want to respond to Councilwoman Riddell Harris, who had talked about a policy for setting aside dollars for general plan. I see that as a separate policy from the reserves themselves. That might be a discussion that we have about the budget process and whether or not there'll be a line item for that versus setting up a saving, these are reserves, so it's a little bit different. So I would just see it as not in the discussion of the reserves, but as discussion of the budget itself.
Okay.
So just wanted to put that out there on that end. And let's just double check to make sure. I don't think that I had any other questions at this point in time on the fiscal management policy proposed. So, Councilwoman Riddell Harris, you had a follow-up question?
Yeah, just real quick. So, sorry, Councilmember Lance brought a couple things to my thoughts. When he was talking about the expenditures, normally, as I understand it, anything that goes over an allotted budget to a specific department would require a budget adjustment. So if that restricted money or anything came back in, we would still, I mean, it can go on consent, but there would still be budget adjustment. I would assume that's how it would work. That would go to council.
On the expenditure side, yes.
Okay,
But the way that, and I need to talk to Nathan to make sure that we're on the same page with this 6 days in, I haven't been able to do that. But the way that I look at the budgeting side on the expenditure is personnel stays personnel, operations stays operations, and individual line items can go over or under. The bottom line is what matters.
Yeah.
So we don't bring back individual line items. If the department went over, we would bring back that, and we do it at either mid-year or at the end of the year true up.
yeah, I trust the department heads to manage their own budgets however they want, but
Yeah.
then when you go over that amount that
Right.
is put in the budget, then it would come back.
Right.
Okay, that's just wanted to make sure I understood that correctly. And then the other piece is that when there is extra funding or something like that, I would hope that we still need to go through and do a strategic plan. But once that happens, each of the departments would have their strategic plan, and that would help to dictate additional funding and where it would be going and things like that. So they would just be following whatever that plan is for the projects that are next on the list that we couldn't fund and things like that. Yep, okay. Just wanted to make sure that was correct. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay,
All right, any other questions on this? Again, we're not taking action tonight on this, just giving consensus. Uh-huh.
Yeah, I apologize, Madam Mayor, I just found this, and maybe this is a broader discussion with your day 6 here. One of the objectives says the city manager will present the annual budget. And I have been a little confused with this whole process of a 2-year budget, when in reality, we're doing everything that we would do in a annual budget. And so are we going back to annual budget, or is it need to read that you will annually present to us the budget?
Okay, this is a little bit of a diversion from this, Paul, but I frankly don't like the idea of a 2-year budget, considering how much work we've gone into doing the second year of the 2-year budget. And so if y'all aren't wedded to that, then I would like to change that, but it's probably a separate discussion that we need to have.
Maybe we can have that discussion when we are looking at the budget, at the June 26th meeting, because I'm in agreement with the city manager on that, but I think that it would be appropriate to discuss it at that time. So
Yeah, I totally support that. The way that the objective reads infers an annual budget,
Mhm.
when I think that regardless, the intent is that you are coming to us annually to present. And so just some words, but
Wishful thinking on the city manager's part.
thank
But
you.
well, let's make sure we have that discussion at that meeting, because I think that's prudent. So are there any other questions on the financial management policies as proposed at this time? Yes, are we ready for public comment, general public comment?
I
Or-
do have the same person who wanted to make a public comment earlier available on Zoom now.
Okay, for the general public comment.
Correct. She had both public comment for items not on the agenda and items on the agenda.
Okay, so let's go ahead and entertain the public comment specifically germane to this item, and then we can open public comment again.
Cheryl, go ahead and unmute.
I did. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So you just want me to speak to this item, not do my public comment?
Yes, just this
Okay.
item, then we'll open up general public comment
Okay.
afterwards, after we're done with the fiscal management policy discussion before ARPA.
Okay. My first question is regarding the financial management policy. Mr. Bagwell, I am just curious, the city council, in this financial management policy, it says that it didn't take, the policy that was passed in 2015 didn't take into concern any economic uncertainties. And so that's why you want to change this evening. I'm just curious, did you take into consideration any of the former general fund reserve policies? Because I was on the council, as were Alice and Mike, and we passed a resolution specific to general fund reserve contingency for emergencies. And it was, in fact, the first time that was ever done on this city council, because there were no policies like that in the past. So we established a resolution, and I know it was 20 years ago now, but I'm just wondering if you took parts of that into consideration when you came up with this fund management policy that you're going to rename. That's my first question.
So through the chair, or through the mayor, I guess is the chair here. I think it is a little confusing because Cheryl is right that the city has been putting the money away under economic contingency reserve. I think, and Nathan, you can speak to this, but it sounds like you're just trying to enhance that a little bit. But it does sound like we haven't, but we really have, and we've established the fund. It's there on the page 1. So it was a little bit confusing. But to Cheryl's point, did you take a look at all the reserve policies that the council had adopted over the past 25 years?
So my understanding, and I appreciate the inputs and the feedback as far as like the perspective on where we've been. My understanding was that this was the policy. So no, I did not look back farther than that, but I can certainly, implement per, whatever council would like
I
to see.
think the point is that the city has been putting aside money for economic contingency. I mean, we have it. When you look at the page 6 of your report,
Mhm.
you say current reserve levels, and it says economic contingency reserve.
Mhm.
And then on page 7, the proposed says economic contingency reserve. So but the staff report text says that we didn't have that reserve and now we are, but we really did. So it's kind of confusing.
Yeah.
But the fact is we have been putting the money aside, just not at the level that's being suggested at this point in time. And that was initially established, as Cheryl mentioned, 20 plus years ago when we talked about the emergency reserve. So it's a
Excuse me.
little confusing.
Excuse me, Alice.
Yeah.
How do you know it is not how do you know it is not as much as, or it's more than we recommended back in 2003? Because there
That I
was,
can't speak to. I'm speaking to simply last fiscal year.
okay, I'm just telling you that there was a formula attached to this resolution. And I would just like our finance manager to review it to see if they're, copacetic, so to speak. That's all.
So, okay, so Nathan, if you could just get that information, and again, since we're not taking action on this tonight, this is just, discussion only. If you could just go back and take a look at the attachment that went along with that resolution, just to see, what the formula was. I honestly don't remember what it was. I'm just looking at what we had budgeted in the past fiscal year and what you're proposing here. And there is certainly a difference of $747,000, but I don't know what that formula, I don't remember, Cheryl, what that was. So if we can just take a look and let us know, that'd be great.
Happy.
Okay, thank you.
I
Cheryl, you have
have
any other comment under this item?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
As I said the other evening, I don't think we need a litigation reserve. I mean, why don't we just bump up the budget? Sandy was asking how much we budgeted for it, and it has been about $300,000 every year, and we've gone over it and every year. So we should just bump up the budget. Why do you have to have a specific reserve for it? I don't understand that.
It's my understanding, and Nathan, please correct me if I'm incorrect, if I'm not speaking correctly to this. I thought that the litigation reserve was really focused on in the event that the city gets sued for something. It wasn't really a reserve to supplement Gary's contract. It was in the event that we got sued for something, and it was additional money for that. It wasn't meant to be additional supplemental money for Gary's contract for everyday duties. It was really focused on potential litigation. Am I incorrect in stating that?
You are accurate.
Okay, so
Okay.
that's what it really is. It's not about funding Gary's contract. It's really setting aside funds in the event that we get hit with some lawsuit, and we just haven't, we have some money that we're setting aside for that purpose.
Madam Mayor,
Gary's salary, we got
Madam Mayor,
settlement, or, there's.
Yeah, but what is the likelihood? Have we
We get
had
sued. The city gets sued.
Well, I know, but generally is covered.
yes. Madam Mayor, that's not what I was saying.
Oh, I'm
You
sorry.
misread what I was saying.
Okay.
we have always, just like Councilwoman Amara just said, you put it in the budget, and if we go over whatever was budgeted, we take it out of a reserve. We don't necessarily, or, we might just have the money on hand in general fund, whatever. And we pay it. We've never been arrears in our payments to our attorney. I don't see why at this time, all of a sudden, we have to have a litigation reserve. I think it's a bad look, actually. If you want to know the truth about it, I think it's a bad look for us to have a litigation reserve when in fact we have a budget for the city attorney, upwards of $300,000 every year. I think it should be put in the budget if you want to increase it. But a litigation reserve, to me, doesn't fit.
So I think there's confusion, Cheryl, and I don't want to, engage in a lot of back and forth because it is under public comment, but just because we're talking about litigation reserve and it's on the screen here as we see it. Again, the litigation reserve is set aside specifically for if the city is hit with a lawsuit. There's a car accident, we're found responsible, 2% responsibility, and we're having to pay for something like that. It has nothing to do with Gary's contract.
I understand that. I
So
understand that.
the money, these litigation reserve funds would not be used to supplement Gary's contract. I think-
Okay, that would not,
But
okay.
I go ahead. And then
How have,
I vote.
Alice, how have we paid for litigation in the past? Where does that money come from? We have been sued. Let's face it. It's not, something that might happen. It has happened. Where did that money come from?
I'd have to defer to the city manager or to Nathan.
It's generally come from the general fund.
So just
Right.
unobligated general fund bond, unobligated general fund reserve.
If we had to create capacity, it would come out of the general fund reserve. Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Another thing that this sort of a fund would be used for, because it talks about claims in the actual policy. So a tree falls on a car and the car gets smashed. Sometimes we turn that over to the risk management pool. Sometimes we don't. It depends on if it's something that we think that the risk management pool will be able to defend us again, and it's not an issue that the city is, negligent on trimming a tree or whatever. That's not litigation. That's a claim that would be coming to the city for the cost of the car that we would take out of this reserve fund and then replenish it at the end of the year if there's a positive balance.
I think I totally understand that, but I think what Ms. Mackey said makes some sense. I mean, does that make us more vulnerable to have a fund there and the public to see that we have this pot of money?
So they can sue us.
Yeah, no, I mean,
That's a good point.
It's a good point.
And the
That is
optics
a
of
good
it-
point.
The optics of it too, that we need to have a reserve fund for our liability.
Thank you. That's exactly right, both of you. So I guess I didn't state it correctly, but I just think it is bad luck. The optics are bad. Thank you, Rachel and Sandy.
Okay.
Okay.
Cheryl, do you have any other comments just under this?
On this item, no, I don't have any more comments on this item exactly, but I would like to speak to the budget a little bit as you get further down.
Okay, thank you, Cheryl.
Sure, thank you.
So I think that with regards to our litigation reserve, I understand, I now see a different perspective on that. And I am concerned about, people seeing as a line item in our reserve and, oh, the city's got $150,000 and we can sue. So that does concern me because there are people that look for those kinds of things, just like they look for ADA violations. So I would prefer to not include that myself in our list of reserves and just, put that $150,000 in the shift it down, either shift it down or shift it. Yeah, I would shift it down because the other is the economic contingency reserve. So council, would there be any objection to, because again, we're not really taking formal action, but would there be objection to eliminating the litigation reserve and just moving those funds under unobligated fund balance?
I would agree with that. I think that's a
Okay.
good idea.
I would agree as well.
Okay.
No objection.
No objection to that. Okay, good. All right. So we have a consensus on that item. All right. What I'd like to do at this point, because we're going to talk about ARPA next. If are there any other questions on this? Any other public comment on this piece of it?
There is not.
Okay, hearing none, then I'll go ahead and go back to general public comment, and I will open general public comment as we now have access to the internet and can hear from the two folks that are online.
Cheryl, you can go ahead.
Oh, okay. I just wanted to make an announcement and invite the city council and anybody in the audience or staff. We're going to be re-showing that movie Elemental on June 28th. And when I say we, it's Firewise, Falcons Point, Arroyo Drive, Firewise community. And we are also going to have our fire chief there, and Lindsay Davidson to us, and Matt Moore from UAIC to do a Q&A after the film. It's a really important film, and we're just trying to get it out to all the Firewise communities. We've invited everybody. We have a flyer, and it is June 28th at 6 p.m. at your city hall, and it's $5 per adult. Kids are free. So, and you have to pay cash or Venmo, one or the other. And I'd like to put a flyer up at City Hall if I can, Amy, somewhere. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I did have the opportunity to see the film when it was last shown here in City Hall, and it was very informational. I'm sure that Daniel has seen it a gazillion times.
I live it every day.
He lives it every day. It's like Disneyland.
Come on. But more importantly, to former Mayor Mackey's point, it is so important for all of our residents and an
Yeah.
opportunity to raise money to do some of the mitigation work in our own community.
Yeah, so June 28th at 6 o'clock, City Hall, Elemental will be shown again. So good. Thank you very much, Cheryl.
You're welcome.
Madam Clerk, additional public comment?
There is not.
There is none. Okay, thank you very much. All right, let's go ahead and continue our discussion now, turning to ARPA.
Thank you. Very good. So moving on to the American Rescue Plan Act funding. The total funding received by the city is just as a recap, 3.4 million. So what we're looking at here is the estimated spending as of the end of this fiscal year. We anticipate it to be approximately $700,000. And then what we're looking at subsequent to that is these are the projects as we have already expensed. So we're looking at the money that's already out the door. I do want to note a correction in the from the staff report as far as 1103 High Street. I believe what I was doing was counting some money for fixing the roof, both in the spent money and the money that is going to be spent in the future. So
You counted it twice.
I counted it twice. Yeah. So as you'll see on the next slide, when we talk about the monies, basically prioritized programming that we're not looking to change anything on, that's going to be
Is
captured
that
in
the
that.
furniture? I'm sorry.
No, it's on, in the staff report, Councilwoman, on page 9 of the staff report, under priority projects, and initially said 1103 High Street had $46,700 left. And that is incorrect. There's $76,700 there.
Yes.
And
So-
so it was, and so that's reflected correctly in the presentation material. If you look above, right there on this slide, that's what he's talking about.
Okay.
There was
Yes.
there was a typo too, or whatever,
Understood.
but yeah.
Big old typo. So
Thank you for fixing that. I appreciate that
Absolutely.
because that was concerning.
certainly. So what we're looking at now is, so basically we're kind of following a methodology here. So let's say we got $3.4 million awarded. Then we say, okay, we're going to have about 700,000 out the door. And then we're talking now about priority projects. These are projects that we do not assume council has any interest or has not indicated that they wish to program otherwise. As you see, we have our approximately $1 million for the downtown and Old Town business associations. We have a great project going already with regards to scanning project Laserfish. We have money set aside for the Carnegie Library. There's the High Street remaining budget of the 150 that was originally allocated. We have some matching funds that we're pursuing for a grant relative to transportation here in the city. And also we have our pickleball or multi-use improvements for the school park reserve. So essentially what we're saying is that you take this 1.5 million, you add it to the 700,000 we anticipate to already spend, and we call that 2.2 of the 3.4 as being programmed. So then what that brings us to is really the delta, what's left over. And as we've discussed previously, what is being proposed by the city staff is that $1.1 million be set aside for the general plan, largely focused at the onset on the land use component of that general plan. Jonathan is here. He can provide you some context as to some discussion or questions you may have around that, but that is what staff's proposal and recommendation is this time in regards to the remaining funds for ARPA.
Okay, are there questions, council members on, I know we've talked about this multiple times, but are there any additional questions or comments? Yes, Councilman Berlant?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Mayor. And I realize that today we're just re-looking at the funding, but I am curious, when are we actually going to implement or support the Old Town and Downtown Business Association improvements?
I need to get together with Jonathan and Nathan and figure out what those improvements actually are and then get them moving forward because council's acted and allocated that money and we need to be doing something with it.
Okay, well, that's a fair response. Thank you.
Yeah.
Day 6, what's day?
I believe that there's a little bit of a disconnect between what at least on the Old Town Business Association side, what they were anticipating and what we have been discussing. And I want to get that figured out
It's
quickly.
in both, districts,
Okay.
but I guess I'm just using this as an opportunity to say,
Get moving.
give them, thank you. Thank you.
Ongoing discussion. Questions? Councilman Holmes, any questions or comments? Yes.
I just have a
Councilwoman.
quick question.
Yes.
So with the utilization of updating the city plan, the funds, are there grants out there that we can still go after even though we set aside this amount of money?
We will certainly pursue that, but this particular intro into that does not anticipate grant funding on the outset, but we will absolutely be pursuing that as much as we possibly can.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think as we talked before, the idea is for us to start with the land use element, the circulation element and the zoning, get those done. And the 1.1 should be either enough or pretty close to do that. And then start looking at the rest of the general plan by socking away money and chipping away at it. So don't need to do all of it at one time. But we do need to do land use, circulation and zoning at one time because they
Yeah,
all tie
they're
together.
related. Yeah.
They're all related.
No, I understand that. But if there's some grants that could help us fund the opportunity to do these projects.
Sure.
And we said it'd take a couple of years to get this thing going.
Land use, circulation and zoning won't take a couple of years.
Will?
No, it will not.
Oh.
It should not. It may be 18 months. It depends on how quickly we could start it. And honestly, it really depends on how much public participation you have.
Mhm.
Previous city, we are 2.5 years into that project and it's still not done. And we haven't finished the EIR to start answering comments on that. So they haven't started. So that's going to be like a 3 or 4 year project. I don't know how controversial things here are going to be with the general plan update. I can't really imagine there being a ton of controversy, but I don't know yet.
Okay. Thank you.
We don't have as much unused land, I guess, really, is the difference between the two jurisdictions. Okay. All right. Any public comment then on this, on the ARPA funding? Madam Clerk, no public comment?
Cheryl, would you like to speak on this item?
Nope, she already left.
No, thanks.
Thank you.
No, thank you. Okay. All right. So you have your consensus on the ARPA monies then. So thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Nathan, are you clear on the fund balance, the policy with the specific reserve buckets? Is there a consensus to keep those as what we proposed? Because we need to know that so we can finalize the budget document. Get it to you
Yeah,
next year.
we did talk
next week.
about the policy themselves and itself, and we talked about consolidating the litigation and then the CIP. Are there any specific concerns or questions with regards to the number allocations that are on, I'll just cite the page of the staff report so we can all be on. It's on page 7. On page 7. I don't have any concerns. I'm fine with the allocations, given that we're going to move litigation under unobligated and combine fund balance reserve for future projects and major equipment. But the rest of that, I'm fine with at this point in time. Council? Yes, Councilman Berlant.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Mayor. I support them as they are. I guess I just have one question, understanding that this is one-time money. What's the plan for holding on to now what will become almost $1 million that's unobligated?
I mean, my druthers would be to look at mid-year or maybe even before that, because we need to finalize CIP, bring the CIP back to you and allocate that million into the CIP
Okay,
and not leave it sitting unobligated.
great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And of course, council, I know you're all very well aware of the fact that we are in labor negotiations and things are going to be shifting around as well. So, yeah.
And I
don't
understand
wanna
that.
say it,
I guess I just assumed because, yeah, it's not ongoing dollars, but your point's valid. And I look forward to a mid-year adjustment to spending that down.
Yeah.
Appropriately, investing it.
but Agreed. Any other questions or comments on the numbers? Councilman Holmes?
well, I'll just have a comment about in grants that the California Cultural and Historical Endowment may be a source of grants for the 1103 High Street and also the Carnegie Library building, since they're both on the National Register of Historic Places.
Yes, and we have been talking with both of their nonprofits about those and the ability to maybe go after some of those. Councilman, did you have any questions specifically on the proposed reserve levels that are on page 7 of the staff report? Or you're
No.
okay?
Actually,
Yes, Councilwoman Riddell Harris.
thank you, Madam Mayor. Just with the unobligated fund, I know you said the CIP, but we also really need to get that general plan stuff moving. So talking with staff and figuring out what's the best use, because I know Jonathan, there's a lot of things Jonathan wants to get done that he can't get done until that's finished, or at least pieces of it are. So just talking about what's the best bang for our buck when it comes to those two things together.
And I really want to just, again, we're in labor negotiations and I think mid-year would be a perfect time to talk about where we're at. And we can,
Yep.
I
just
just
wanted to
really,
bring that up.
I'm very concerned and I have my own thoughts. It's premature for me to talk about it, but I have some strong feelings as well. I'm just not. Okay. So consensus has been reached. It looks like we're fine with those numbers at this point in time, as proposed with the proposed changes.
Yeah, perfect. So now we can either move on to operating budget and do like a real high level, go over that, or we can push that to next week, whatever you want to do. We're prepared to talk a little bit about it. We don't have all the details and the numbers are still being finalized. It might be better to push that off and just talk about it next week. We're trying to keep next week's budget.
I'm not going to be here next week. I'm going to be remote. So whatever we can get done, I would like to start the conversation rather than going till 11 or 12 at night next
Okay.
week, if possible. I mean, it's only, we all put our schedule, it's only been an hour.
Yeah.
So it seems like it might make sense to at least start the conversation. I don't know where you guys are at.
I think.
The only thing is I like to be prepared. And
Mhm.
so next week might be better.
Um,
There's some preliminary things you can tell us.
Yeah, I think-
One thing I just wanted, from our last meeting, when we talked about, and it kind of goes into this, we talked about the budgets for the committees and the commissions. And in the proposed budget received in our binder, you'll see that the requested amounts are included in there, but I just want to make it very clear that the council has not adopted the work plans or the uses of those funds at this time, that we will be talking about that next week. So I just, for the purposes of our preparation for next week, there's a placeholder there. And it sounds like staff, the city manager is going to bring back a discussion in mid-August that really dives deeper into the committee's enabling ordinances and what they have authority to do and don't do and so forth, so that there will be a deeper discussion there. But I just, for the purposes of the record and as we prepare for next week, we just recognize the fact that although the dollars are there, this council has not has not agreed to all of the items. If, for example, Economic Development Commission was initially requesting the $50,000 for phase 2 on branding. And there was a consensus not to put that, not to move forward with that in the Economic Development Commission's budget.
We put
That-
it into John.
That it would go into community development instead.
Yeah.
So I just to let folks know that that's kind of where we're at, that none of our committees and commissions should feel like because the dollars are here in the budget, that the council has endorsed the expenditure of those funds specifically, because we will have to have that discussion. Certainly, those items that are ongoing, they can expect, for example, Arts Commission in the summer series and things of that nature, that can continue. That was funded in this fiscal year, but anything new. Mhm. Yes.
Yeah, Madam Mayor, just a question to that, and I agree with what you're saying, but I'm just curious from a procedural standpoint. Is that going to then be direction that we give to staff so that the staff can determine which of those projects of those committees are important? Because we have not done that as a council, and I'm not sure that's necessarily something we need to do. I understand what your point is, but I also want to make sure that it's clear to city management, but then also understood by our committees what that looks like, because otherwise, procedurally, this council has done what it's done, which is give the money.
Mhm.
But if they can't access it, it leaves it a little bit vague. And I completely understand the intent, and I completely understand that by day 7, Sean will do a better job of this. But historically, we've had some starts and stops with
Mhm.
committee budgets that has not been very productive or consistent.
And our last meeting, you'll recall that we did provide that clear direction to staff to take to scrub the budgets, the committee budgets with against the enabling ordinances, and then to come forward with recommendations so that you're clear on that, correct? I mean, I think we did talk about that quite a bit.
Yeah, I guess because I obviously wasn't here last year. So I guess the question is, does council typically go through each individual committee budget, approve their work plan specifically, or is that delegated to staff to do that? Because
We
don't really have
Yes, and
There's no
we
process.
need to, this is something that for next year, we really need to have a process, because it needs to be like a 2-step process where the committees are coming to us much earlier, like February or March, with a list of things that they're interested in pursuing. We can have a high level discussion.
Yeah.
And then if we agree with those issues, then we can then fund them in the budget when in May and June, when the budget comes through. Because it isn't fair to the committees and commissions. And so
Oh, sorry.
and that's what we expect of our departments as well, right? We expect the departments to kind of come to us at the higher level in, February, March, and at least they come to the city manager.
Are you saying that every single project has to be approved by us?
Can I-
Or
No,
just what
Can I make a
what
suggestion?
the
Well,
city
I-
manager determines is of high priority?
So hold on, Madam Councilwoman Riddell Harris. So what I'm saying is that right now, what happens is that currently, the past several years, many years, I can't even remember, the committees and the commissions have come to us with their proposed budget that includes all their proposed work plan. And this council has discussed and debated and whether or not we're going to agree with this, and we don't agree with that, because sometimes, they're asking for too much money. And so we will certainly agree or disagree on certain items within those budgets. And we've always had control over that. But we're just going to change that up so that, our committees and commissions can come forward earlier and with an idea. For example, if the Endurance Capital of the World Committee wanted to purchase a billboard, this is completely not, this is hypothetical only. They'll come to us and say, this is something we'd like to pursue. And we'd have a discussion and then say, yeah, we think that's great, whether or not we're going to give you budget the money, or if we're going to put it in, community development or whatever. So, does that answer the question?
Kind of. I think we need to have a discussion on how we want to do this process.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Rather than just right here decide.
Yes,
Um,
and that's what the city manager is going to also.
But then the only other thing I think we need to do
And-
is sooner than later, since we don't have a process, sooner than later, we have to get back to these committees.
Yes, we do.
I mean, you're saying that some committees get carte blanche to go and do as they've done, and other committees, can't do anything right now. So
No,
we-
I don't think so. I think that some committees
Because they've done it in the past, and I'm not
Yeah.
criticizing you. I'm just saying that
I
they're,
think all the committees have done some things that are in their budget. I don't
So-
think there's any committee that has just brand new things.
so what I'm saying is, though, we do need to, these committees are waiting, volunteers are waiting.
They are.
They're going to lose interest,
Mm.
and we
My,
just.
my point is just that we need to make sure that we as a council are, supporting those items in their budget. Our committees are advisory and they serve the council. And so it's important that the council, a majority of council members support the projects of all of our committees. Because they are not elected, that we are the ones that are accountable to the taxpayer. And so for all of our committees, and it's us,
Oh, and I
end of
get
the
that,
day.
but,
And
but
so-
I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think some of us on the council here don't want to hear every single project.
Can I,
And so we have hired a city manager
Yes,
who
and he's
could-
going to come
who
forward
could
with a
make some
recommendation.
decisions and not even have it come to us.
I'd
And
like to make a
That's,
suggestion.
that was
that might
my,
help.
maybe I misunderstood what people are saying.
So in municipal governments in general, normally there are thresholds and they help people not to be micromanaged. And so maybe it's if the dollar amount that the project they're trying to do is over a certain threshold that we can all decide, then it needs to come back to us. Or if it impacts city buildings or city staff. Because like if the Arts Commission is going and painting utility boxes, that's not impacting staff, it's not impacting our facilities, and it's not really a big dollar amount. So they can go, if they want to do 3 rather than 2, I don't really care. So I mean, as long as.
Well,
they're
that's
paying attention,
policy
but-
that we have to get into.
But I
Yes, we
think
have
that
to
if
get
we
into
can set some threshold, then it won't have to do with what they've always done versus something new. I mean, if somebody decides to do something new for $50, I don't care. So I think we need to set those thresholds so that way we're not micromanaging them and we can let them do their work without us having to approve everything.
My big concern is, again, all of our committees are advisory only. And so, and they do provide us with a proposed work plan, and the council needs to be supportive of that work plan, at least a majority of council members. The committee should not just have carte blanche, we're going to give you $50,000, go have fun. That's irresponsible of us. And really, they don't have that authority. I mean,
I don't think any of us are suggesting that.
yeah, and so I understand that, but again, our city manager at this point in time, we've asked him to do a scrub and he'll be coming back to us. And we do need to fine tune this process because it isn't fair to anybody, the committees, the commissions, or the council, but
I think a good way to just kind of facilitate the committees getting started, right? And not being held up to August, September, whatever it is just, if you're okay with this, I'm going to go through the ordinances, the resolutions, make sure that what their request is lines up with those, the enabling the legislation, whatever that is. If it does, and it's not a policy related issue, then they can do it. If it's a policy related issue, it comes back to council because council sets the policies, not the committees. And if it doesn't match up with the ordinances, then obviously council has to talk
that
about
will
that
have to
too.
come back.
But that way they're able to get
I-
moving and get
I
something
feel
going.
like if it impacts our staff or our facilities, 'cause
Right.
that has to do with our staff too, that we should talk about it because I don't want to keep adding projects to our staff
Right.
because they've already allocated their time.
Well, that would be
But-
policy related.
Yeah,
That would,
I just
that-
want to make sure that's part of it.
that's a policy
Yeah.
thing. So
Does that make sense?
Mhm.
Yeah.
are we
just-
okay?
That way everybody's not just kind of waiting for me to do
Yes.
something.
Yeah, thank you. And I know we're belaboring this, but I think it's important. So. Okay, so at this point in time, we can either move forward and do some general discussion of the proposed operating budget or not. So we have one councilwoman, a member who's indicated they'd like to kind of get an overview. Councilwoman Amara, I know you've indicated that you prefer to have that discussion at the next meeting. I'd like to hear from the other council members.
Yeah, Madam Mayor, myself, I don't mind staying here for a little longer and using our time all wisely. But I guess for me, the one thing that I haven't seen yet that would help me, and I assume it's not ready to go just based on the conversations, is I really would like to hone in on just the changes. What's going up and what's going down. There's about $1 million, difference, actually a reduction, plenty of reasons. But I just think for me, it would be helpful to be able to go through and say, the fire department, we are proposing adding $200,000 for this project. For the sewer fund, we are reducing it by $500,000 because We're not going to do the big project that we did last year. And I know that would be helpful for me because, you know, we all have the budget in front of us. We've had it for a long time. Yes, there's been some adjustments, but it also, in all fairness, is 100 pages of a lot of numbers. And so to really be able to provide us, but more importantly, the public with the overview, that's what I would ask and assume that's not ready. So that would probably be a better discussion to go through. And I'll just note here that as we've talked about, that is how we've done it in some of the years past, is actually had the directors of each department come and just go through their 3 or 4 things that are changed or what they're asking for. No different than we asked the committees to do. We had back and forth,
Yeah.
and then we moved on. And we may not have that time in 11 days, though technically we have a 2-year budget. But but I know that would be helpful for me, is to see the actual changes to the budget compared to last year.
So, so Nathan, I don't know if you have that information, you know, just out on the top of your head, or if you'd like to just wait and give us that information at our next meeting. I mean, the next meeting, Sean, I don't know what other items are on that agenda for the 26th, what kind of meeting, what kind of length that meeting is going to be.
So right now for the open agenda, we have budget and then we have the recology rate increase. That's it.
The recology rate increase.
Because I wanted to make sure that we had plenty enough time to talk about budget
Okay.
and the recology increase as well. But Nathan does have a presentation ready to go. That's kind of the like higher level part. So I think we could start with that. And then obviously next week we'll do what Councilmember Belant was talking about.
Okay, so are we okay with just doing some very high level information right now? And then we're still going to dive into the details at the next meeting? Is that okay with everybody?
Yes.
Okay, so let's proceed. Thank you.
So we probably will need to get into next week though, as far as like very much detail, because really this particular aspect of our presentation got us pretty well into depth as far as what was needed for preparation. So what I've got for you as far as what we can talk about is very high level. Essentially that we've got a balanced budget, 17.9 million anticipated in general fund reserves and expenditures. What that entails is we have $2.3 million in pension costs, and that encompasses our normal pension costs as well as our pension obligation bonds. We do not have an anticipated unfunded accrued liability bill anticipated for the upcoming year. We did mention previously that we have approximately $1 million proposed use of general fund balance for one-time projects. So we've talked about that. And again, I see you taking a picture of this, Mayor, I can absolutely provide you with this.
Okay, thank you.
This was a contingent aspect of this presentation, so I wasn't thinking we're necessarily going to get into it. So that's why this is here. This will of course be revisited next week. And I can absolutely I will absolutely send this out after the conclusion of this meeting. Essentially what we're talking about here is we've got a balanced budget. We're maintaining our current levels of service, and off we go. Subsequent to that, this is a breakout of the proposed budget one-time expenses. And this gets in kind of more detail of what Councilman Berlant was asking about, specific to things that we've already identified. The fire capital for the Martin Park and Easton fire stations are already in the CIP. The self-contained breathing apparatus, $250,000. That's coming forward. We set aside 125 last year in deferred maintenance. We have another 125 coming forward this year. And then of course, the fire truck lease, where I break it out a little bit in a little bit more detail under that, where I talk about the totality of that $1 million, where we had spoken about in the capital reserve that we're now mentioning rolling into the CIP, which is great. How that encompasses 79,000 in the current year, and that 592 is the totality of it over the course of the life of the lease. That is as far as I was able to get as far as high level. So
I did
just at
want
high
to,
level, that was
Can
very.
we ask a few questions on things that we don't think or may not be? I don't want to leave everything till the last possible day. So if there's a couple questions we have, generally, if we've already gone through the whole budget, can we ask those questions now versus waiting till?
well, it's
the
just
last
on the
minute?
budget. So the budget is on the agenda. I mean,
Yeah.
if you have a specific question, but
Okay.
there was also something else I did want to raise with the council. In the packet, or actually it's in the proposed budget, and we have a line item for the State Theater and the Auburn Symphony. And I thought that those were going to be part of the applicants for the discretionary grant for the upcoming year.
Yeah, we weren't gonna line item them.
But they're
in.
line itemed in the budget. I'll tell you on which page.
We think it's highly likely that, that, you know, because, I mean, what's going on with the state theater, they might be a good applicant, but we're not gonna guarantee, because it's gonna go through a competitive process.
There was, I can't remember where I saw that exactly. I should have, hold on, I did dog ears stuff there. It's in the, I think it was in the, oh my goodness gracious. So many documents. Well, yes, here it is. It's in the just for, so that we can talk about this next week when we talk about the budget. It's in the proposed budget document that we got our binder, and unfortunately, the pages are not numbered. So that makes it very difficult to tell you where it is. But in the budget, it says that there are $259,355 appropriated towards support for community projects. And that's where it has city historian 500, library contribution 12,000, community TV 12,000, etc. That's where we also have our undesignated sponsorship, but it does have a line item for the Auburn Symphony for 10,000, Auburn State Theater for 10,000, and then community support grants for 20,000. And we don't have to, you don't have to answer this now, but just to be prepared to discuss next week, that $20,000, is that the encumbered monies from this fiscal year into next? Or is that intentionally meant to be monies for 23, 24? So there was just that question. And then just the question on, you know, the fact that we've identified Symphony and State Theater with the separate line items, $10,000 each. Is that intended to be there as that, or did we intend that to be under the discretionary program where they would compete? So just some questions for discussion at the next meeting. I just want to bring those up. And then one thing that I would like the council, just giving you a heads up for our next meeting. I think that there should be a designated line item for support of 4th of July costs. I don't think that the chamber should be having to ask for financial support for 4th of July every year, going through that process. I don't even know where they get their funds, if it's Economic Development Commission or the city manager, I don't know. But I have asked the city manager to get us a history of an account history. But normally most cities that, you know, one thing that's been an advantage to me being on the League of Cities Board of Directors is I have an opportunity to talk to a lot of cities all over the state. And what do you do and so forth. And the 4th of July activities are generally funded by cities. And we're really fortunate because our chamber steps up and does it, but they always ask for financial assistance from us. And I don't think that, to me, they're doing that for us, you know, to celebrate the 4th of July. And I think, I'm not saying we need to pay for all of it, but whatever we historically give, let's say it's, I don't know, I have no idea. If it's $3,000 that every year they're coming and they're asking for $3,000 or $2,500 plus a little increment, I think that should just be in the budget, like library service, like Auburn Community Television. There should be a line item so that the chamber can guarantee that we are contributing. Because I really do feel that that is a city thing. I'm not talking about for the Festival of Lights Parade or any other thing, but to me, 4th of July activities, we are fortunate that the chamber does that. They cost a lot of money. And we're very fortunate that we're not the ones organizing it, but I really feel that that is something that everybody, all of our constituents can get behind. I think it needs to be a line item in there every year so that they know what the budget's going to, they know what they're going to get. They don't have to apply for it. See, they're applying for that. And the chamber has not come to me with this. This is something that I myself, I just would like us to talk about at the next meeting. I'm just
Can
giving
we
you a
just
heads
talk
up.
about it now and direct staff to put it in the lineup? Because we're talking about the budget tonight. Because I'm fine with that.
Well, I think that the council or the city manager will bring that forward. So
Well, the amount, but the fact that we want to put something in the budget, I think that we can get agreement on that.
okay, good. So let's do that and figure out what that amount is going to be. And that would be an amount that the city manager would determine each year based on whatever cost of increase or whatever.
Yeah.
But I just, thank you, council. I really feel that that's important and prudent upon us to contribute to that. And I don't think the chamber should have to compete with Economic Development Commission or whatever. I don't even know where they're getting the money. Anyway, thank you. Thank you, council. Are there any other just overall
Go ahead.
questions?
Did you have something there?
No,
Oh,
I can wait.
okay. Sorry. I just had a couple things similar to what you were saying that I read through the budget and I was kind of wondering either where something was or if we could add something. One of them is I looked at travel for council and I had heard in the past that whoever wanted to attend the Cal Cities conference when it was local was able to attend. And I think that that's important, especially when it's in Northern California and Sacramento. So I would like to make sure that we have enough travel that we can at least all attend Cal Cities if it's local. I think it's every other year. Does it go back and forth or is it always in Sacramento? Alice, you know?
It goes back and forth every year. So it's Long Beach. It alternates between Long Beach and Sacramento. And this
So if
year
we
it's in
could-
Sacramento.
So but we could at least go during the Sacramento years, then that gives everyone at least 2 out of 4 times while they're in office that they can go to the Cal Cities event. And I think that's important just to get everyone exposure to those things. So I just wanted to throw that out there because I know that you said when you had been on council before that had been something that we
We
had
did,
done.
we did. Yeah, the council members, all council members had access to the league of, the annual league conference. Mhm.
So I just wanted to know if there might be support for doing that and adding that to the budget. So, I don't know.
And so, Sean, when you talk about the city council budget, you can, next week, let us know if there's, sufficient funds. Cause I know we also talked about ensuring there's money for cap to cap. And those things. So, that should be, that
Yeah,
should
I just wanted to make sure
Yeah.
that was, do that. Okay, I had, this is, I guess, a Menjo question, since it doesn't get into all the details of your work plan, is getting someone to do an EV plan, an EV conversion plan, part of the budget for next year. I just wanted to make sure that was included. Something for getting us to figure out how we're converting over to EVs. Is that okay for Menjo to answer that question?
Yes.
Okay, sorry. I was just. With all this clean fleet stuff, I just wanted to make sure that we're giving you sufficient budget to figure out all these details and how they're gonna work.
It's currently not in the budget, but it is something that I anticipate that I'm going to speak to the city manager about.
Okay,
Because I also know the council gave direction to the city manager for the, what is it called? The grants manager position. So there's a conversation that him and I need to have in regards to that.
okay. All right. I just want to make sure we're doing something around that. The last question I had was, we had some work done by the sustainability committee about some energy efficiency work that could really benefit the city and reduce our operating costs. And though we didn't end up going with that particular assessment that was given to us, I think it's important for us to at least put some money into a plan. So that way we can get that assessment and start scheduling in those improvements into the budget or figuring out, like was recommended, a financing plan to do that so we can save that money. Because normally when you do solar, the first thing you do is energy efficiency and then you do solar to reduce to make it green after you've already reduced. And I know they found a lot of inefficiencies in our city buildings and things that need to be replaced. And so I just wanted to see if there was anyone also interested in putting in some money for doing a little bit of that planning and getting someone to do that assessment. Because I know it costs money to get that assessment done and just do that full energy audit of our facilities to make sure that we're being on top of our energy use.
I'd like to know more about it.
Yeah, I think about it. I think that we can talk more about that, but it's something to.
I'm not sure if sustainability has done that. Is that what Rocky Whitson did? Do you know, Glenn?
I thought you were
Sorry.
looking at me.
No, sorry.
I need to, Rocky emailed me and I.
Glenn Kramer, sustainability. No, that was part of the study that was done in November by the consultant that came.
The
that,
IGA.
Yes, that's right. So there was purchasing city streetlights, because a lot of them are mercury vapor. You could get a lot of savings out of that. There was solar. There were air conditioning and heating improvements, and there were lighting. Those were the 4 big items.
And they did a high level assessment, but in order to really know what you need to replace, so we can do a a bid to get those things replaced and figure out how much it's gonna cost, you have to get a more detailed level of assessment, and that's what they were gonna do if we decided.
Didn't Rocky work on that?
Oh,
You know what I'm talking about?
Rocky is working on measuring our greenhouse gas emissions.
Right.
Yeah, part of that, part of your charter. Yeah.
Right.
Mhm.
That's different than an energy.
That is
energy
correct.
assessment.
Okay.
So
Sure.
I just would be interested in that as a cost savings measure, and a plan doesn't cost a ton of money, but it makes it so that we can schedule those improvements into our budget.
I think if we're looking at doing some sort of a capital improvement to city facilities, city hall, police, whatever it is, part of that improvement needs to be a plan that's done. It should really go into the CIP and not into the annual budget.
Mhm.
Okay,
So we can
Yeah.
look at, we've got this unallocated reserve, right? This fund balance that we're going to be pushing over to the CIP. That would be one thing that we could use for that.
okay, great. I think those.
And we'll be talking about that mid-year, once we have a handle on all that. I just want to make that clear.
And then I just also wanted to check really fast. I just wanted to make sure a small amount of money got in for marketing into the city manager budget, which we said before for doing some city.
You mean like the
collateral,
little swag stuff?
the swag and collateral and stuff. It's not going to show up, but I just wanted to make sure it got into some kind of budget somewhere.
I love swag. We'll make sure that we got.
Well, we have swag for police and fire. I just went to a school and I had nothing other than a pin, which is not very big for the middle school.
Little pencils are,
Yeah, but we'll
I
figure
mean,
it out.
that it's so cheap, like pencils,
The
the,
kids love it. They're
I
very
know.
excited.
the economic, I mean, the endurance capital of the world, Cincy is our swag expert and, she's like, she'll get us pencils at, for, 2 cents,
Yeah, I
for
just wanna make
1,000
sure
or something.
If Public Works is out and they see a kid or something like that, we just have some stuff to hand out.
Yeah.
That's little small swag. Okay. Any other just general questions, knowing that we're going to really dive into the details next week? Yes, Councilman Berlant.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Mayor. Just a couple that I'll just kind of pepper through here, if you don't mind. And if you don't have answers tonight, that's fine too. We can, happy to follow up. Some of these maybe we'll follow up after, offline here. But I am curious in Department 111, the community projects. There had been some discussion, I thought it was at it may have been at Medler's, Mayor's putting you on the spot, regarding library services and the fact that none of the other cities are asked or make a contribution. And I was just curious if, Mayor, and maybe you have the answer to this, if there's been anything out of those conversations and if we still need to make the $12,000 contribution
Mhm.
to a library that has a pretty large library reserve fund. And since none of the other cities is cash strapped Auburn still need to pay what the other cities are not.
So we have discussed this a couple of times at our 3x3. And really the $12,000 it's utilized is for the collection, the library collection itself. The city of Rockland actually does contribute in the sense that they lease their building. They own the library in Rockland and they lease it to the county for $1 a year. So they are also contributing financially. The Loomis Library is now owned by Loomis. They've purchased it from the county. I don't know about Roseville and Rockland. We have a seat on the library advisory board. And this really does go back to when they consolidated the Carnegie Library collection to the Auburn Library. And that was really our responsibility. I feel comfortable. It really is, it goes to the collection of the library itself. We do have a voice on the advisory board. That's Jane Hamilton, as you'll recall, we've designated her as our representative. And, again, Rockland does contribute because they are, giving the building at $1 a year. So I think that we're not the only ones that are contributing, and Roseville might be, and Lincoln, I don't know.
I'm pretty sure Roseville does their own.
They
Yeah,
might do their own.
And Lincoln does too.
Lincoln does
has
their
its own
own.
library system.
So Rockland and then Colfax doesn't, Colfax doesn't have.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I don't want to spend too much time here. I just think it warrants the discussion with, and I don't have the number in front of me, but with the library fund at the county having a substantial reserve, enough for the county board of supervisors to dip into it for library capital improvements. I'm just curious if our $12,000 is really that critical in now a multi-million-dollar budget with a multi-million-dollar reserve fund. But moving on.
Yeah, and they use that, the county's money is using it really for the building and so forth. And the $12,000 that the city contributes goes for the library collection itself and books and things of that nature.
Yeah,
I
my
get
point is
that
just, it's a multi-million-dollar
It is.
department
it
now,
is.
and we're strapped with $12,000. So, but I was curious, and Sean, this can be a follow-up. Department 120, a city manager, a reduction of $70,000 for contractual services. And I was curious which contractual services we had in the city manager budget that we no longer need or have moved elsewhere.
You know the answer to that.
That one.
I'll look forward to hearing that response because that was a pretty big reduction. My last question was, I
Oh.
get,
I do know.
okay, go ahead.
We actually increased that at mid-year in anticipation of hiring a labor negotiator that we had not previously budgeted for. So we increased that amount according to that. And so we do not anticipate necessarily doing that in the upcoming year, though we may. But if we do, we'll come back and request that authority.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. And then I guess on that same vein, the recruitment firm for the city manager, did that also come out of the city manager department?
Yes,
Okay,
thank you.
that makes sense. So I understand,
And we don't need that anymore. Thank you.
no, for many years.
They did a great
And-
job.
Do you
Okay.
understand?
They
Mr.
did an
City
excellent job.
Hold us to that in 2 years, though, Don. Nathan, I understand that there's a reduction in some of the costs, the PS costs in Department 150 with the establishment of the HR department
Yeah.
and their own department. But I was curious, community development is dropping by $60,000, and I was curious what the shift there is, because I thought we were actually moving a position into community development. Again, if you don't have the answer, this isn't a,
It's a
you know,
question.
yeah.
Yeah.
It's not a gotcha, but I am just curious. Those are the kind of swings that I'm just curious about.
And the $50,000 that we were thinking about for the Economic Development Commission going back into Jonathan's budget too, that needs to be reflected.
Interesting.
So if you could note that and follow up.
Yes, that
My-
needs to be moved in there. It's not there now.
Yeah.
Yeah, I will look into
The
that.
council on consensus, I think.
And if that is incorrect, at 105, I will correct that and I will point that out.
Okay, thank you. And then
Sure.
lastly, back to former Mayor Mackey's point about our city attorney and the litigation fund. And Mayor, you did a good job explaining the difference. I am curious, though, the dollar amount that we are establishing here is a low compared to the last couple of years. But I'm curious, does this reflect the new contract that
With the
that we
changes.
agreed
just
upon?
agreed-
Yeah.
That we need to make sure of that because we did approve a rate increase for that contract. So I don't know if that's reflected in here, but let's make sure that it is.
Because
If
it
it's
just
not
seems
contemplated, I'll make sure.
low.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean,
It,
yeah,
it was
just seems
low in context
low.
of what our actuals have been. And that was one of those things that it's kind of a budget call, right? When you're developing these and really we're trying really hard to make sure that we're not coming back on an annual basis and having this massive surplus because we were so conservative, right? So we're trying to find that happy medium in terms of what we think is likely to happen versus, being conservative and protecting the city as well. I'll dive in on that 281 and see. I don't think it contemplates an increase in the rate. So if whatever that increase in the rate is, I will subsequently increase that to come in that money.
Well, I wouldn't necessarily sorry to interrupt you.
Just
I
wanna make
wouldn't necessarily
sure.
add the increase in the contract because it's not per se an increase. It's also a restructure.
I see.
But I heard you say the 281 that is budgeted right now really was a methodology that got you there. So it's not necessarily the last year's dollar. So you don't want to just add the new formula to it. But my point is, I just want to flag to make sure that that department is budgeted based on what we already know.
Okay, well, yeah, we'll definitely take a look at that.
So, okay, thank you, Madam Mayor. That's all I had.
Thank you. I was just going to say that to Councilwoman Riddell Harris's point with regards to Department 110 for City Council on travel. That amount probably, we're estimated to spend, the $7,500 this year. That cap to cap trip, because we established a policy to say we send the mayor or a designee, is almost that entire $6,000. I think so that needs to be bumped up a little bit to make sure that we have enough funds. And then also if a council member does want to go to the League of Cities I think that all council members should be able, especially it's in Sacramento this year, so, next year it'll be in Long Beach, but the city council members, our budget is very small. We, there was a restructuring with regards to health benefits and things of that nature and payments and so forth. We really, our per diem isn't $300 a month. But to be able to do city business and travel on city business to do the city's work, I think that there should be monies available for your reimbursement. Again, I'm spending the money in my own pocket to go to Chamonix. That's going to cost me some dollars, but, and I'm not asking for that in this budget, but, if you're traveling somewhere and it'd be nice to be able to, get your mileage.
Yeah.
If you're taking a trip to, the San Francisco or something like that, or your bridge toll, and you're on city business, it would,
And I'm personally, I agree with you, except that I think we do need to evaluate what we go to. I like the League of City Voters. I think it's
League
productive.
of Cities.
League of Cities.
Yeah.
It's voters too.
Yeah.
League of Cities. But cap to cap, maybe every other year, it's just such a high cost. And I'm not sure, do we really derive that much out of it being so far away?
You can skip it to you're the mayor.
Okay, good. And I'm just, I agree with you. We're not paid much and it's good. We want to encourage as much as we can, but maybe there's more other things that we should do and utilize our money for our education.
Well, there's some money in there for training and education, but I don't know if we ever
Not much.
spend very much. But education is also League of Cities because they, when you
Yep.
go to the League of Cities, you attend your workshops and there's training.
And you make good contact.
Yeah. So it's, I guess some of that could be there.
I think it's important to make sure that you all have enough money to do stuff that we need to do. And so
Mhm.
I'll talk to Nathan and we'll figure that out. Other cities I've been in have set it up to where it's specified per council member and each council member gets like $3,000. And then you can do League California Cities, whatever you want to do. Cap to cap would be a separate carve out because it's specifically for the mayor, but all the other council members, including the mayor, gets a separate $3,000. And then if one of you doesn't use your 3,000, you can transfer it over to somebody else. It ends up being a little bit of horse trading that way. That's worked pretty well in other cities I've been in to make sure that everybody has the same access
Mhm.
to all the same stuff. Because if you have one or two of you who want to do a lot and the other two or three don't, you can just shift it around.
Yeah.
Good idea.
Mhm.
I think it's important to make those relationships and be able to go to a couple events a
Very
year.
important.
Yeah.
I think that's as important as some of our other things we do for the city.
And, recently I've had the opportunity to attend quite a few events. I went to the Greater Sacramento Economic Council's retreat, which was at no cost to the city, and I didn't put in my mileage for reimbursement, but networking was incredibly valuable there. that was I'm so glad that I went there and to try to drive some business to Auburn and some key contacts that I made.
Oh, yeah. And I'm not trying to say that's not
Sure.
important. I'm trying to say is important, but maybe more local might be better.
I like the idea of having that separate amount so that way people can prioritize what they think is important.
Right.
I like that.
Yeah.
I like that too. And then if someone is not wanting to do something, then,
Yeah.
They don't have to.
if
See,
Sandy comes to me and says, this is really important to me, are you going to use all your, and if I say, gosh, I don't have time to do all these things,
Or better yet, if everybody wants to give me their money for Chamonix, I'll be happy. to go.
look, that's I gotta, so, in any event, I think that's, again, we do have an opportunity to do some things, and the networking things are very important, and the partnerships that we're establishing and training and things like that are important. We don't attend the business. There's another trip in the fall that goes, the Placer Business Alliance.
Yeah.
And I've heard that that's an incredibly good one because it really focuses efforts and discussion just on Placer County. And we don't have money in the budget for that. I would love to be able to go and have those discussions in DC, just focusing on our Placer County and being there for PCWA, for the county and so forth. But there's just not enough funds there. So, sometimes you got to spend a little tiny bit of money to make money too. So let's just
going to the PBA
revisit
one.
that and maybe come up with a proposal so that we can get the biggest bang for our buck there and to be responsible to taxpayers as well. So, all right.
Yeah,
Yes, Councilman Holmes.
yes. What we used to do from time to time is to use if it was a meeting in Sacramento, we take a city sedan and use that. And which,
Yeah, then you don't have to get your mileage.
yeah,
Mhm.
yeah.
I think we still have that option to use a city. I don't know. I think I did that one time, Councilman Holmes, when I went.
Tesla, yeah.
I think I used yeah. The fireman's Tesla,
No, transit.
the transit Tesla. Yeah. Tesla. Wow. Yeah. The fire truck's a Tesla.
That would be interesting. They've got the 18-wheeler.
Yeah. But you're right. We have done that from time to time as well. I prefer to take my own vehicle, but I don't know if we still have that. I don't know if we have that capability. Do we still have that capability?
I think,
We can carpool for team building too.
yeah.
Yes, I always encourage carpooling.
The only thing about taking the city car is that there might be liability issues, and I don't know how our risk management stuff is set up with council members.
Yeah.
So I don't know. We could look at it and find out.
Mhm.
Got one more question.
Yes.
I know that we're gonna need to create a real strategic plan, sometime hopefully soon. I was looking in, the budget for the city manager. Is that consulting services for the strategic planning, consultant, or did we add that in somewhere? Cause I really would like to use an outside person this time.
So that was direction I received from Joe, was to go ahead and put some money into the contractual services of the department for the city manager. So yes.
Okay, so
That's
that's what that
right,
is.
yeah.
Okay, great. Just wanted to double check.
All right. I think we have public comment on this item, Madam Clerk.
Cheryl, would you like to unmute?
Sure. Hello again. I would just wanted to, in the time management theme, I would just like to ask Nathan to make sure next week during the budget, I'm hoping to understand the solid waste management fund, Fund 69, as to why it's always a deficit and why are we not putting money in there? Even though I know we don't collect enough money, why are we not putting money in there to cover that deficit? I know we don't know how much it's going to cost us completely, but we should be putting money away. And on the 23-24 budget line item, the amounts are incorrect. So the addition and subtraction, whatever, is incorrect. So I can talk to you about that later. I just wanted to give you a heads up on that. And as far as Sean's idea about a one-year budget, I'm right on board with that, because as far as I'm concerned, you have a one-year budget. I don't see how a two-year budget has been any different than the one-year budget. So as far as the time you as council members have had to spend to review this. So anyway, those are my comments. Thank you very much.
May I make a quick
Yes,
comment?
Councilman. Brother.
I completely agree with the direction on the one-year budget. The only item, though, that I thought there was significant value this year, though we have talked about it for many years, was Mengel's move of taking our roadway overlay, taking 2 fiscal years worth and putting it into one. And now we're getting the same amount we would have done spread over 2 years, but only paying for one mobilization fee, only having to bring our costs down. And so I guess I would just ask you to think about how could we figure out how to commit the overlay dollars without waiting, and only doing it every 2 years, but figure out how do we allocate that in an ongoing basis that's more strategic. And maybe it's simply getting pre-authorization for the future fiscal year. And since we're doing this in June, taking the June and July and just merging them together. But I guess that would require a little bit extra legwork. But that was the one thing that I took away this year that I thought was very helpful. I don't know from staff, and I don't know if we've fully seen what the cost would be, but with 2 thumbs up from Mengel, I take that would be something to think about at least.
I also had the same thoughts. I think that one-year budgets are fine, except for when you have multi-year projects or longer projects where staff want to make sure that they have that guaranteed funding moving forward to do some things that have multi-steps over multiple years. So trying to figure out how to make sure that that funding is assured so that they don't feel like it's going to just die depending on what happens a year from now. I think that's important.
Yeah, we can encumber 2 years worth of road improvements in 1 year.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, we could do that. And then the idea of kind of being a little bit cute on when we decide to bid, having 2 projects going at one time, but one in 2 different fiscal years,
Yeah.
do them all in June or July, actually. We could do that easily too. We'll figure that out.
Thanks.
And I just wanted to echo Cheryl's comment with regard to the solid waste management fund, because I highlighted that in here as well, that I had a concern. I mean, we show a deficit and, I want to just be able to talk about that and why we're not appropriating any funds for that, because we do know that there's expenditures there, just to kind of get an understanding of.
One more thing for Public Works is I was looking at the storm drains and I saw there's a chunk of money in there for rehabilitation, but I didn't know if we'd actually finished our assessment and know what we should be. I know that there's always something that needs to get fixed because it's so old right now, but I just didn't know if there's do we have a plan? Have we done an assessment of all the storm drains? Because it's better to have a plan and then act on a plan versus just trying to keep putting whole fingers in the dike as it's erupting around you. So I just wanted to make sure we're doing adequate planning around that and adequate assessments of the storm drains.
So we can talk about that. Just be prepared to talk about that next time. Okay. All right. Is there any other general, 10,000 foot level questions at this point in time by the council? Any additional public comment, Madam Clerk?
There's not.
Or Cheryl? I don't see your hand raised. All right. So with that said, Sean, do you feel like you have good direction on what we want to discuss next time? Of course, we'll have to take, I started looking at all the documents, but I knew what we were going to talk about today. So I still have quite a bit to finish reading. So, understanding that we may have some additional questions and expect that.
Yeah.
We asked for quite a few changes to this, even since it was printed last week. Are we going to get another copy of this before the meeting
Yes.
that we can go through? Okay.
The final budget with the budget message, all that'll be packaged up and out to you Wednesday, Thursday, somewhere in there.
Great. Thank
Hopefully
you.
by the end of Thursday for sure.
Okay. Great. Thank
All
you.
right, good. Okay, great. With that said, we have no further business before us. Let me just double check the adjourn. Yep. So no additional business before us. And so I will hereby adjourn without objection. Seeing none, we are adjourned. Thank you, everyone.